The 9,649th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. No. The provisional agenda for this meeting is threats to international peace and security caused by terrorist acts. The agenda is adopted. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2024/442, the text of a draft resolution submitted by the United States of America. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/442 please raise their hand? The result of the voting.
Votes against, and then abstentions. Votes against.
Okay. Those against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 0 votes against, 1 abstentions. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2734. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Mr. President. The United States thanks Council members for their constructive engagement on this resolution. We welcome the extension of the 1267 Committee's monitoring team and ombudsperson mandates for an additional 36 months. We also welcome the Council's further recognition that sexual and gender-based violence is a tool terrorists utilize to further their aims, which is reflected in this text, including its listing criteria. The United States welcomes the support from Council members regarding this inclusion, given the devastating frequency of this horrific tactic. ISIS's use of sexual slavery against the Yazidi community to incentivize recruitment, Al-Shabaab's use of abduction, rape, and forced marriage to subjugate those in areas under its control, Boko Haram's kidnapping of schoolgirls to generate revenue. I could unfortunately go on and on. It is clear that terrorists use SGBV as a tactic to punish, humiliate, ethnically cleanse, fund their activities, and control territory. Promoting accountability for conflict-related sexual violence is a priority for the United States, and this resolution is a critical step forward for the global campaign to end sexual and gender-based violence. Extending the 1267 monitoring team also demonstrates the importance of its independent reporting. Recent 1267 monitoring team reports have shed light on the concerning growth of ISIS and Al-Qaeda branches and related operations across the African continent. Today's renewal also extends the mandate of the 1267 ombudsperson, who plays an important role in promoting fairness, transparency, and due process, particularly for non-state actors. Colleagues, the 1267 sanctions regime continues to play a critical role in promoting peace and stability around the globe. The United States, again, thanks Council members for their constructive and fruitful engagement to achieve the adoption of this important resolution. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
主席，中方对刚才通过的2734号决议投了赞成票。这一决议重申对恐怖活动的严重关切，要求各国继续严格执行制裁措施，并将1267委员会监测小组和监察员授权延期36个月，再次体现了国际社会打击恐怖主义的坚定决心。第2734号决议指出，当伊斯兰国和基地组织将实施性暴力和性别暴力作为恐怖主义的策略时，相关行为可能符合现有的列明标准。在国际社会尚未就性暴力和性别暴力同恐怖主义的联系达成明确共识之前，决议的有关表述是比较恰当的。我们希望委员会在后续的工作中严格遵守上述规定。主席，当前国际反恐形势依然严峻，伊斯兰国、基地组织、东伊运、巴塔、马吉德旅等恐怖组织持续活跃。安理会要继续用好126区制裁机制，支持各国反恐努力。安理会成员应加强互信协作，摒弃意识形态偏见和双重标准，客观公正地审议列明申请。中方感谢监测小组和监察员所做的工作，期待他们继续公正履职，维护好1267制裁机制的权威性和有效性。谢谢主席。
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
Господин председатель, Российская Федерация воздержалась по резолюции Совета Безопасности, продлившей мандаты мониторинговой группы по санкциям в отношении ИГИЛ и Аль-Каиды, а также омбудсмена по делистированию на 3 года. Мы последовательно поддерживаем действующий санкционный режим 1267. Считаем его одним из наиболее эффективных. Актуальность и значимость работы Комитета Совета Безопасности 1267, 1989, 2253 не вызывает сомнений, особенно с учетом характера.
Bearing in mind the nature of the contemporary terrorist threats from ISIL, Al-Qaeda and other associated groups in Syria, in Iraq, Afghanistan, Southeast Asia and in Africa. Analysis of the challenges clearly demonstrates the importance of effective implementation of the relevant resolutions of the Security Council on this. We support the mandates of the monitoring team and the ombudsperson. The Russian Federation is not calling into question the heinous nature of any sexual crimes. There is no doubt that if terrorists associated with ISIL or Al-Qaeda use sexual violence as a method of achieving their goals, and that if there is proof of this, then the committee should take this information into account and act accordingly. At the same time, recently we are witnessing a situation whereby UN mechanism as a whole and subsidiary bodies of the Security Council also are used to abuse the sanctions toolkit. In some cases, the opportunity to see proof unfounded and propaganda-based statements taking place, and this is unacceptable and it undermines the UN's authority. We will stand up strongly to any attempt to use any politicized lever to water down the counter-terrorism nature of Committee of 1267, 1989, 2255 Committee, and we will continue to stand against any proposed change of priorities, where then rather in the place of real cooperation to fight ISIL, Al-Qaeda and associated terrorist groups, a distraction of the focus to secondary questions that have no added value directly in the context of countering the terrorist threat. It is unacceptable to automatically tie the question of SGBV to terrorism. We are strongly convinced that cases linked to sexual violence should be considered as long as there is reliable information, and also they cannot and should not be used as an independent criteria for listing. President, in conclusion, I'd like to underscore that in the work on the text, our delegation demonstrated a constructive outlook and a readiness to take a responsible approach to finding compromises. We provided all necessary arguments on all complicated and difficult questions. However, the American sponsors did not think it valuable to preserve the consensus spirit of the counter-terrorism agenda at the Security Council. The decision was not an easy one, but we did not want to block this resolution at the Security Council because we believe it is important to continue have the work of the monitoring team and ombudsperson to continue. In our work, we will continue to take a responsible approach to designating individuals' organizations on the sanctions list 1267, primarily due to the terrorist nature of their actions. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of France.
Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, President. France welcomes the adoption of this resolution, renewing the mandate of the Sanctions Monitoring Team on 1267 and the provisions on the Ombudsperson. We thank the United States for leading the negotiations. Daesh and al-Qaeda terrorism is one of the main threats to international peace and security, and we will continue our shared fight against these terrorist groups. The resolution we have just adopted allows us to update the sanctions regime against Daesh and al-Qaeda to better take into account the evolutions in this threat. It recalls us that we must continue with our mobilization, particularly to combat terrorist propaganda and to dry up the sources of financing for terrorist groups. France welcomes this. This resolution allows us above all to establish the fact that sexual and gender-based violence are, in some cases, parts of terrorist tactics. Let us remember that 10 years ago, Daesh hit the Yazidis, particularly women and girls belonging to this community. Many of them were victims of sexual violence, including sexual exploitation, and were enslaved. These women continue to feel the consequences of the atrocities caused by Daesh, and France does not forget them. We continue to work so that these crimes will not go unpunished. We therefore welcome the adoption of this resolution, which opens the way to better recognition of this violence in the international fight against terrorism. These can now be taken into account in the context of requests for inclusion on the sanction lists. The monitoring team will have to include this in dialogues with member states and in its reports from now on. This is a further step to fight impunity for the perpetrators of sexual and gender-based violence. Be assured, President, of France's full commitment in combating terrorism. I thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Mr. President. Algeria's vote in favor of this resolution reflects our conviction that it upholds the core objectives and legitimacy of Daesh and al-Qaeda 1267 sanction regime. We also believe that it responds to the evolving terrorist threat, considering the gravity of this threat and our unwavering commitment to international cooperation in countering terrorism. We regret that this resolution was not adopted by consensus. The 1267 sanction regime has always derived its strength and effectiveness from the unity and political commitment of all Council members. Algeria appreciates the efforts of the penholders to address the concern of our delegation. However, we are still of the view that some matters deserve further consideration, including in the relevant UN bodies. Moreover, we underscore the importance of the member state-driven nature of the listing and delisting process and of preserving the character of these processes. We firmly believe that the mandate of the monitoring team should not be politicized, as doing so would undermine the credibility and the effectiveness of the whole sanctions regime. In addition, reviewing the mandates of the ombudsperson and the monitoring team for an extended period will provide greater continuity and resilience for the implementation of the sanctions regime. We also support efforts to further strengthen the independence and capacity of the ombudsperson in line with due process. To conclude, Mr. President, Algeria will continue to work constructively with all delegations to preserve the integrity and effectiveness of the 1267 sanctions regime. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, Sierra Leone welcomes the adoption of the resolution, which reaffirms the United Nations commitment to fight against terrorism and terrorist acts, especially those committed by Daesh, Al-Qaeda, and their affiliates. We voted in support of the resolution to renew the 1267 sanction regime mandate because of our firm belief that it has been an effective mechanism in combating global terrorism and fighting against Daesh despite ongoing challenges. We believe the adoption of this resolution further strengthens the need for ongoing vigilance in monitoring terrorist groups and encourages international cooperation to support anti-terrorism efforts. In voting for this resolution, we believe that high-risk jurisdictions need to comply with international standards for combating the financing of terrorism, CFT, and anti-money laundering, AML, as established by the Financial Action Task Force, FATF. We also recognize the efforts of CTED and CTC to involve the Financial Action Task Force and other global financial regulatory bodies in this process. Similarly, we welcome the inclusion of sexual gender-based violence as a designated listing criterion. We believe this is a positive step in the right direction, and we further anticipate its full implementation. Additionally, its inclusion as a designated criterion will help increase accountability for SGBV linked to terrorism. We appreciate this Council's continued commitment to preventing terrorist acts and promoting peace and prosperity through collaboration and dialogue with host and neighboring countries in the fight against global terrorism. In closing, we congratulate the United States of America in its capacity as penholder for steering these negotiations in an inclusive manner and for considering all Council members' inputs and positions. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned. The 9,650th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is the situation in the Middle East, including the Palestinian question. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Israel to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of item 2 of the agenda. Members of the Council have before them document S/2024/448, the text of a draft resolution submitted by the United States of America. The Council is ready to proceed to the vote on the draft resolution before it. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements before the vote. I give the floor to the representative of the United States of America.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, the last 8 months have been nothing short of devastating. For Israelis who lost loved ones on October 7th, when Hamas set this conflict into motion by carrying out acts of unthinkable violence. For Israelis and people from more than 16 other countries whose sons and daughters, brothers and sisters are still being held hostage by Hamas. For Israelis who face constant rocket bombardment from Hamas, rockets that are fired off by terrorists hiding in civilian areas within Gaza. The past 8 months have also been devastating for Palestinian civilians in Gaza. Nearly 2 million Palestinians have had to flee from one place to another in search of safety. And for so many, that safety has been elusive. My heart aches for the young child who will forever be traumatized by seeing their family members killed. For all Palestinians who've lost loved ones in this fighting. And for humanitarian workers, people who put their lives on the line to deliver aid to those in dire need, who've been caught in the crosshairs at an unprecedented level. We continue to call on Israel to do everything possible to protect civilians. But let's not forget that Hamas's leaders are the ones who have put civilians at risk by hiding in tunnels underground and facilities that are near civilians and doing nothing to shelter those civilians. I've rarely ever seen anything so egregious and cowardly. Palestinian civilians are living through sheer hell through no fault of their own. And the humanitarian situation in Gaza has gotten worse and worse and worse. Families are living in makeshift conditions, unsure of what the next day holds. Millions are grappling with the uncertainty of what will be left when they are allowed to return home. I think about the parents trying to find food for their families, about the child who's been forced to stop their education, about the elderly person who no longer has access to essential medicines. Colleagues, after 8 months of devastation and pain and trauma, what is needed now more than ever is for the fighting to end in a sustainable way. The United States and every single country in this chamber want to see an immediate ceasefire with the release of hostages. We've heard those calls time and time again since October 7th. Now the opportunity is here. We must seize it, and we must speak with one voice. For months, the United States has worked around the clock alongside Egypt and Qatar to broker a ceasefire deal between Israel and Hamas, because we know this is the best way, actually the only way, to bring about a durable end to this war. Since the brief ceasefire and hostage release last November, such a deal has proven elusive. Why? Because Hamas has refused to accept any agreement. But right now, there is another opportunity, because as President Biden recently announced, Israel has agreed to a comprehensive deal. That is the deal now on the table, which is nearly identical to Hamas's own proposals. This deal would bring hostages home, ensure Israel's security, enable a surge of humanitarian relief and essential services, including water and electricity, medical facilities, and rubble removal to Palestinian civilians in Gaza, and set the stage for a political settlement that provides a better future for Israelis and Palestinians alike. This deal has been endorsed by countries across the region, including Algeria, Egypt, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, and the UAE, as well as by the G7 and those 16 countries whose citizens are being held by Hamas. Now we're all waiting. We're waiting on Hamas to agree to the ceasefire deal it claims to want. But we cannot afford to wait and wait and wait. With every passing day, needless suffering continues. And so all of us, as members of this council, have a critical role to play. We can help bring about peace by adopting the resolution before us, which calls on Hamas to take the ceasefire deal and urges both parties to fully implement the deal's terms without delay and without conditions. This resolution, put forward by the United States after consultations with all council members, makes clear that the world wants an immediate ceasefire with the release of hostages. The resolution also explains the framework of the deal. So let me take a moment to lay that out. The first phase of this agreement would last for 6 weeks and include an immediate, full, and complete ceasefire with the release of hostages, including women, the elderly, and the wounded, the return of the remains of some hostages who have been killed, the exchange of Palestinian prisoners, the withdrawal of Israeli forces from the populated areas in Gaza, the return of Palestinian civilians to their homes and neighborhoods in all areas of Gaza, including in the north, and the safe and effective distribution of humanitarian assistance in Gaza, including housing units delivered by the international community. Importantly, the proposal says that if negotiations take longer than 6 weeks in phase one, the ceasefire will continue as long as negotiations continue. And the United States, Egypt, and Qatar would work to ensure negotiations keep going in good faith until all the agreements are reached and phase two begins. In the second phase, upon agreement of the parties, there would be a permanent end to hostilities in exchange for the release of all other hostages still in Gaza and a full withdrawal of Israeli forces from Gaza. Phase three would see the start of a major multi-year reconstruction plan for Gaza and the return of the remains of Israelis and others still in Gaza to their families. Colleagues, this is the deal on the table. Israel accepted this deal because it ensures its security. As President Biden made clear, Hamas is no longer capable of carrying out another October 7th, and the United States' commitment to Israel's self-defense is ironclad. Colleagues, I'll also note that this resolution rejects any demographic or territorial changes in Gaza, including any actions that reduce the territory of Gaza. And it reiterates this Council's unwavering commitment to the vision of a negotiated two-state solution, where Israelis and Palestinians live side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders, consistent with international law and relevant UN resolutions. We all agree that a negotiated outcome along these lines is the only way forward. The draft before us also stresses the importance of unifying the West Bank and Gaza under the leadership of a reformed and revitalized Palestinian Authority. And this text recalls resolutions this Council has adopted since October 7th, including Resolution 2712, 2720, and 2728, all of which demanded that all parties to the conflict protect civilians. Colleagues, we need Hamas to agree to the ceasefire deal, and then we need Israel and Hamas to implement the deal without delays or conditions. I don't want to keep waking up to news reports of more fighting and more loss of life. I don't want the families of hostages, many of whom I know personally, to endure even one more day without their loved ones. I don't want another Palestinian family, including the relatives of people I have met with, to experience any more loss or suffering. I want to see an enduring ceasefire where Israel is safe from the threat of further terrorist attacks and rocket fire, and Palestinians can begin rebuilding their lives in safety and security. I want to see families reunited. I want to see Palestinian children safe and fed and back in school. I want to see people return to their homes. We all want to see this better future. Those of us here in this room, people across the world, and most of all, those living under this terrible conflict. And so, colleagues, we must seize the opportunity before us. We must speak out with one voice in support of peace. I urge all Council members to vote yes on this resolution, to vote yes for peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I shall put the draft resolution to the vote now. Will those in favor of the draft resolution contained in document S/2024/448 please raise their hand? Those against? Abstentions? The result of the voting is as follows: 14 votes in favor, 0 votes against, 1 abstention. The draft resolution has been adopted as Resolution 2735. I now give the floor to those members of the Council who wish to make statements after the vote. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you again, Mr. President. Colleagues, today this Council sent a clear message to Hamas. Accept the ceasefire deal on the table. Israel has already agreed to this deal, and the fighting could stop today if Hamas would do the same. I repeat, the fighting could stop today. This council and countries across the region and the world have endorsed this agreement. Hamas can now see that the international community is united behind a deal that will save lives and help Palestinian civilians in Gaza start to rebuild and heal. United behind a deal that will reunite hostages with their families after 8 months in captivity. United behind a deal that would lead to a more secure Israel and unlock the possibility of more progress, including calm along Israel's northern border with Lebanon. We cannot forget the Israelis displaced from their homes in northern Israel under threat from Hezbollah. These attacks from terrorist groups backed by Iran must stop. They have to stop. Colleagues, the ceasefire deal would pave the way toward an enduring cessation of hostilities and a better future for all. As President Biden acknowledged just the other day, the Palestinian people have endured sheer hell in this war, started by Hamas. There's an opportunity to chart a different course. Hamas must take it. Egypt and Qatar have assured the United States that they are continuing to work to ensure that Hamas engages constructively, and the United States will help ensure that Israel lives up to its obligations as well, assuming Hamas accepts the deal. Over the past 8 months, this council has often faced divisions, and the world has taken notice with understandable frustration. But there's another side to this story, because today we adopted the 4th resolution on this conflict. For the 4th time, we have spoken out and made clear the only way to end this cycle of violence and build a durable peace is through a political settlement, one that ensures Israel no longer lives in the shadow of a terrorist group and is further integrated with the region. And I want to make clear that Israel will always have the right to defend itself against threats to its security and to bring those responsible for October 7th to justice. Colleagues, today we also reaffirmed our commitment to the vision of 2 states where Israelis and Palestinians live side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders, consistent with international law and relevant UN resolutions, and where a revitalized and reformed Palestinian Authority leads a unified West Bank and Gaza. This is the future that we must help bring about. And this all starts with the ceasefire deal that this council endorsed today, and that this council unequivocally called on Hamas to accept. Colleagues, today we voted for peace. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Mr. President, our thoughts are with the more than 37,000 Palestinians who have been killed by the Israeli occupying forces during this last 8 months. Over 20,000 of them are women and children. These martyrs, for us, are alive with their lords. They are watching over us from heaven. Mr. President, we Algerians deeply feel the suffering of Palestinians and with our own history of struggle against colonial occupation, we fully understand and support their legitimate and just demands. As a free and dignified people, the Palestinians will never accept living under occupation. They will never abdicate their fight for liberation. From the start of our mandate in the Council, our objective has been and remains clear and unwavering: to halt the massacres committed by the Israeli occupying forces in Gaza. During these dark times in human history, Algeria's sole guiding principle has been the preservation of Palestinian lives. We cannot stand by while the Israeli occupying forces continue to exterminate Palestinians. We also cannot remain silent in the face of this collective punishment. To us, Mr. President, Palestinian lives matter. Palestinian lives matter. We voted in favor of the draft resolution submitted by the United States because we believe it can represent a step toward an immediate and lasting ceasefire. And I would like to extend our gratitude to the US delegation, especially Ambassador Linda Thomas-Greenfield, for their diligent efforts and for addressing some of our concerns in the final text. Algeria engaged during the negotiation process in good faith, working closely with Palestinian and mediators to achieve a resolution that ensure an immediate ceasefire and hopefully will have a tangible impact on the ground. Like any other product of the Security Council, this text is not perfect, but it offers a glimmer of hope to the Palestinians, as the alternative is continued killing and suffering of the Palestinian people. We voted for this text to give diplomacy a chance to reach an agreement that would end the aggression against the Palestinian people that has lasted for far too long. It's time to halt the killing. Mr. President, this resolution ensures that, first, the immediate ceasefire will continue as long as negotiations continue. Mediators, the United States, Egypt, and Qatar will work tirelessly to reach an agreement on the second phase of the proposed deal. This was one of our key concerns. Second, this resolution guarantees the return of Gazans to their home and neighborhood, including the north of Gaza, within 6 weeks. It counters the occupying powers' attempt to empty the north of Gaza of its inhabitants. Third, the resolution sends a clear message. No change to Gaza's demographics or territory will be permitted. So, no buffer zones will be established in Gaza, and the Israeli occupation forces must withdraw from the entire Gaza Strip. Fourth, given the unprecedented level of destruction in Gaza, which will take decades to clear, the international community, through this resolution, reaffirms its commitment to the Palestinian people and for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, guided by its solidarity with the Palestinian people. My country, Algeria, will do its part and contribute to the international reconstruction effort. Fifth, this resolution reaffirms the international community's commitment to the establishment of a Palestinian state. Action by the occupying power to undermine the establishment of Palestinian state are futile. The resolute commitment of the international community will make the Palestinian state a reality soon. Mr. President, the continued barbarity by the occupying forces will only result in more senseless death, as we witnessed this weekend in the Nusayrat refugee camp. Such crimes against humanity cannot go unpunished. For those killed in Nusayrat and in all occupied Palestinian territories, for the Palestinian children and women, we reaffirm Algeria's commitment to accountability. For those responsible for killings of Palestinians, they will face justice. No one will be immune. None will be above the law. To conclude, Mr. President, if the International Court of Justice order are not enforced and those responsible are not held accountable, sooner or later, a new genocide looms on the horizon. Mr. President, it is evident that unless the root causes of the Palestinian tragedy are properly addressed, new tragedies, new catastrophe, new killing, and more suffering are inevitable. Therefore, our first objective must be the end of the occupation. And my country, Algeria, will remain steadfast in supporting the Palestinian people until they attain their inalienable rights, including self-determination and the establishment of their state with Al-Quds Sharif as its capital. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. The UK voted for this resolution as an important step in bringing about an end to the conflict that has raged since the horrific attacks on the 7th of October and moving towards a lasting peace. The situation in Gaza is catastrophic, and the suffering has gone on for far too long. The deal on the table is something that the UK has long called for. It is the best way to get the remaining hostages out, bring about an immediate ceasefire, leading to a permanent end to hostilities, and enable a significant scaling up of much-needed humanitarian aid. We call upon the parties to seize this opportunity and move towards lasting peace, which guarantees security and stability for both the Israeli and Palestinian people. Far too many lives have been lost already. There is desperate need for humanitarian assistance in Gaza, and hostages have now been held for over 8 months. News of the rescue of 4 hostages will be a huge relief to their families. Our thoughts are also with the families of those still captive and all the innocent lives, both Palestinian and Israeli, already lost and affected by the conflict. We must secure the release of all hostages and end the fighting. The UK applauds the diplomatic efforts of Qatar, Egypt, and the United States in negotiating the deal that is on the table. We note that Israel has accepted the deal and call upon Hamas to accept the terms and bring an end to the suffering of the Palestinian people and the hostages that remain in detention. We must then see a rapid increase in the flows of humanitarian aid throughout the entire Gaza Strip, with the opening of all border crossings and facilitation of the minimum operating requirements of the UN and international humanitarian organisations. The UK remains in steadfast support of a credible and irreversible pathway towards a two-state solution, with Israel and Palestine living side by side in peace and delivering security for both nations and the wider region. As we have made clear, a sustainable peace must also include Hamas no longer being in control of Gaza and international support for the Palestinian Authority so that it can resume governance and security responsibilities across the West Bank and Gaza. The UK stands ready to support this. President, the UK has long advocated for a deal such as the one on the table. This conflict has gone on for far too long. Now, more than ever, is the time for diplomacy. Now is the time for peace. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, President. We thank our colleagues from the United States for tabling this resolution, which complements the commendable diplomatic efforts of Egypt, Qatar, and the United States towards achieving a comprehensive ceasefire in Gaza. Malta voted in favor of this resolution as the crisis remains untenable. We welcome this Council's ability to support a resolution that aims to put an end to this harrowing cycle of violence. Malta has consistently called for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, the release of all hostages held, and a comprehensive response to the humanitarian crisis in Gaza. We fully support initiatives which bring us closer to these imperatives. On Saturday, we welcomed the news that 4 hostages abducted during the 7 October attack by Hamas were successfully rescued by Israeli forces. All those that remain in captivity must be immediately and unconditionally released. However, images from the aftermath of the Israeli operation into Nuseirat refugee camp, in which scores of Palestinians, including children, were reportedly killed, are truly horrifying. This incident is not isolated and is emblematic of the scale of suffering in Gaza. We unequivocally stress that international humanitarian law must be respected by all parties. We further emphasize the need to address the catastrophic humanitarian crisis in Gaza. Humanitarian aid must be delivered at scale into and throughout the Gaza Strip. Crucially, aid distribution must also be safe and unhindered. We need full compliance and implementation of the relevant Council resolutions and the full, immediate and effective implementation of the orders of the ICJ. A ceasefire, as outlined in the proposal, remains essential to dealing with those deepening and with these deepening and immediate-term humanitarian concerns. The ceasefire proposal would also lead to the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from the full territory of Gaza and the space to mount an international reconstruction effort for Gaza. Most importantly, it would put the parties on the path towards reviving a credible political process for a lasting and sustainable peace, which is anchored in the two-state solution. We urge both parties to the conflict to accept and fulfill the terms of the ceasefire proposal without delay and without condition. It is high time to put an end to this unprecedented suffering and usher in the return of hope, stability and peace for Israelis and Palestinians alike. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
I thank you, President. Switzerland voted in favour of the resolution tabled by the USA and welcomes its adoption. I would like to thank the American delegation for this initiative. This resolution calls upon the parties to conclude and implement without delay or conditions the 3-phase proposal for a ceasefire in Gaza. This plan currently represents the best chance for a way out of the appalling violence raging in the Middle East, which has claimed tens of thousands of civilian victims since the acts of terror committed by Hamas on the 7th of October, which we strongly condemned. Switzerland has consistently called for full respect by the parties with their obligations under international law, including international humanitarian and human rights law. This call was clearly reflected in resolutions 2712, 2720 and 2728. Through the latter, the Council demanded an immediate ceasefire to be respected by all parties and to lead to a lasting ceasefire. The adopted resolution is in keeping with the logic of respect for international law. It calls upon the parties to implement a ceasefire without delay or conditions, to release the hostages, and to facilitate the supply of humanitarian aid through all possible routes and crossing points, and throughout the Gaza Strip. Switzerland deeply regrets, however, that despite the request of several delegations, including our own, the call for respect for international law and in particular international humanitarian law and human rights law did not find a place in the text voted on today as it had in previous resolutions. The events of the last few days have demonstrated once again that respect by the parties to the conflict for their obligations under international law is vital if further bloodshed and civilian deaths are to be avoided. We are relieved that 4 hostages have, after many months, been reunited with their families and once again call for the immediate release of all those still being held captive. However, we are alarmed by the very high number of Palestinian casualties reported in recent days, particularly during the rescue operation in Nuseirat. We reiterate that a distinction must be made at all times between civilians and combatants, and between civilian objects and military targets. President, with its positive vote today, Switzerland has confirmed its support for the negotiations led by Egypt, Qatar and the United States, whose efforts we commend. We now call on Israel and Hamas to conclude and implement this agreement as soon as possible. The Council's collective support for such an agreement is aimed at finally putting an end to human suffering, halting the continuing escalation of violence in the region and laying the foundations for a solution of 2 democratic states, Israel and Palestine, living side by side in peace within secure and recognized borders. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Thank you, Mr. President. The devastating conflict in Gaza has gone for far too long, with too much suffering and loss of innocent life. The catastrophic humanitarian situation is indescribable. Many of the hostages are still being held in appalling conditions. Japan greatly appreciates the vigorous diplomatic efforts led by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, and we strongly support the 3-stage proposal outlined by President Biden. If Hamas accepts the deal and both parties commit themselves to negotiations based on this proposal immediately and with sincerity, it will finally bring about the long-awaited ceasefire and release of hostages. This is what the Security Council should call upon right now, and thus we voted in favor of the resolution proposed by the U.S. The resolution was adopted, and this opportunity must be seized. Japan hopes this strong pronouncement by the Council will help the parties finally reach a ceasefire deal that would allow for the release of all hostages and influx of critical humanitarian aid at scale. Today, the Security Council has upheld its responsibility to maintain international peace and security by expressing our strong desire to see the end of a vicious cycle of violence. This Council must stand ready to take necessary action further down, just as we have done today. The people of Gaza and the hostages still held by Hamas are counting on us. I thank you, President.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you, President. Slovenia voted in favor of the resolution 2735, focusing on the comprehensive ceasefire deal in Gaza. We would like to thank the U.S. as a pen holder for their efforts. Since the start of this conflict, Slovenia has been calling for a strong, united voice from the Council on this issue. We believe that calls by the international community, efforts by mediators, and those of a bilateral nature are intertwined and should be mutually reinforcing. We deeply appreciate the determination of Egypt, Qatar, and the United States aimed at reaching this deal. The Security Council is the primary body entrusted with the maintenance of international peace and security. Its voice should be clear and united. This is why we welcome the adoption of the resolution seeking the Council's endorsement of this deal. We call on both parties to accept it and implement it fully and immediately. Let me underline our consistent call for the full respect of international law, including international humanitarian law and international human rights law. International law is clear. It prohibits hostage-taking, it prohibits the denial of humanitarian access to civilians and attacks against humanitarian workers. It includes the right to voluntary return of displaced persons. My point, colleagues, is that many of the elements of this deal should already be taken place, as should have been the case for the implementation of the previous 3 Council resolutions, along with the ICJ orders on provisional measures. Mr. President, we have been saying this for months now. The suffering in Gaza must end. We have been constantly calling for immediate release of hostages. However, military operations for the release of hostages, leaving hundreds of civilians killed and injured like the one in Nusayrat refugee camp on Saturday, cannot be the new normal. The principles of international humanitarian law and human rights law apply to hostage rescue operations as well. The denial of aid to civilians, including women, children, persons with disabilities, and older persons. Humanitarian and UN personnel killed. UN premises targeted. Hospitals sieged. Children's limbs amputated without anesthesia. Women giving birth without appropriate assistance. Mass graves. Civilian areas in Gaza and in Israel targeted, attacked, and destroyed. None of this should be taking place. Mr. President, photos of children, some of them born during this war, dying because of malnutrition, will go down in history as one of the conflicts this Council should have prevented. It is for these reasons that we once again call for an immediate ceasefire. This is the first step towards achieving a comprehensive solution. It is for this reason we support an international peace conference under the auspices of the United Nations. It is for these reasons that we underscore our commitment to the two-state solution based on pre-1967 borders and the unification of Gaza Strip with the West Bank, including East Jerusalem, under the Palestinian Authority. Everyone has their part to play, and every step contributes to the peace process. In our opinion, only 2 sovereign and equal states can make this peace happen. It is for that reason that my country last week recognized Palestine as an independent and sovereign state, and we call on others to follow suit, so that the future generations in Israel and Palestine can live side by side in peace, security, and prosperity. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of China.
Thank you, President. The conflicts in Gaza have lasted over 8 months, killing more than 37,000 Palestinian people and leaving over 2 million people in unprecedented humanitarian catastrophe. Israel's massive offensive against Rafah and its attack on Nusayrat refugee camp over the past 2 days have caused additional major casualties. Facing such a human tragedy, the international community reached overwhelming agreement long ago. Both the GAESS and the Security Council have adopted multiple resolutions which contain clear-cut provisions, namely immediate, unconditional, and lasting ceasefire, immediate release of all hostages and Palestinian detainees. Guarantee for smooth, unimpeded, and adequate humanitarian relief into Gaza and its timely delivery to those in need. Protection of civilians, and strict accountability for acts in Gaza in breach of international humanitarian law. The U.S. leader announced on May 31st the Gaza ceasefire proposal. Then, the U.S. submitted a draft resolution to the Security Council, urging both Israel and Hamas to accept the ceasefire proposal and fully implement its terms without delay and without condition. By common sense, if the parties concerned reach agreement first, which is then followed by the Council's action of endorsement, such a course of action would be more appropriate. However, if the Council's action is conducive to reaching agreement and conducive to immediate realization of permanent ceasefire, such an action would still be a positive one. Based on the views of the Council members, the sponsor has revised the draft resolution. However, the draft is still ambiguous in many aspects. We still have valid concerns on whether the parties concerned will accept the ceasefire proposal and whether the three-phase arrangement can be carried out smoothly. Meanwhile, we have noted that the proposal says if the negotiations take longer than 6 weeks for phase 1, the ceasefire will still continue as long as negotiations continue, and relevant parties are ready to work to ensure negotiations keep going until all the agreements are reached. The sponsor has also indicated that Israel has accepted the ceasefire proposal. Our understanding is that as long as ceasefire is achieved, no more fighting will be launched again. Immediate realization of permanent ceasefire, this has been the strong appeal of China and the Council members for months, and this has been the most pressing aspiration of Gaza civilians in deep sufferings. From the perspective of the urgent need to stop more killing and to alleviate humanitarian catastrophe, China voted in favor. President, all Council resolutions are legally binding. The resolution just adopted is equally binding as Council Resolution 2712, 2720, and 2728. All of them should be implemented in a comprehensive and effective manner. We hope that the sponsor will work sincerely in an impartial and responsible manner to push for immediate realization of permanent ceasefire. China will work with all parties to push for early stop of fighting in Gaza and bring the Palestinian-Israeli question back to the right track of the two-state solution as early as possible. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative.
As early as possible. Thank you, President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Guyana.
Thank you, Mr. President. 247 days have passed since Hamas's horrific attack on Israel, and since Israel launched a war on Gaza unprecedented in scale and impact. The death toll from this war is staggering, with thousands of Palestinians killed in barbaric ways. The humanitarian situation is catastrophic, and Gaza has been made an abyss of destruction. Despite the adoption of resolutions both by this Council and the General Assembly calling inter alia for the protection of civilians and a ceasefire, the war has persisted, with civilians continuing to face grave danger. Today, Guyana voted in favor of the resolution tabled by the United States because we viewed it as another valuable contribution, this time by the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, towards achieving the end of the war and bringing relief to the hundreds of thousands of civilians suffering in Gaza and to the Israeli hostages and their families. Specifically, Guyana notes that the ceasefire proposal with which the resolution treats aligns in several ways with previous resolutions adopted by this Council. It is still critical, however, for the Security Council, in keeping with its primary responsibility under the Charter for the maintenance of international peace and security, to redouble efforts towards the urgent achievement of a ceasefire, the release of all hostages in Gaza and of Palestinians illegally detained, and for a surge in humanitarian assistance in Gaza. These are the steps needed to bring immediate relief to civilians being ravaged by Israel's 8-month-old war on Gaza. These steps are also foundational to the reconstruction of Gaza and more broadly to reviving the vision of the two-state solution, which is the only just and comprehensive resolution of the Palestinian question. Mr. President, as Guyana supported the resolution adopted today, we wish to reflect on 3 key elements not included in this resolution, but warranting continued attention. First, this resolution was considered in the context of the dire humanitarian situation in Gaza, one of the most egregious consequences of the war. For Guyana, the ceasefire proposal is logically seen as a response to, inter alia, the unprecedented humanitarian situation in Gaza. Second, we reiterate our demand for adherence to international law, including international humanitarian law. As Guyana has consistently pointed out, this war is characterized by the violation of international law with seeming impunity. In this context, it is therefore important to continuously emphasize the parties' obligations to strictly comply with international law. The Security Council should be the lead voice in this regard. Third and final, as we welcome the proposal for a ceasefire, the Council itself must continue to unequivocally demand a permanent ceasefire. Mr. President, in closing, Guyana stresses that this Council's responsibility for achieving a just end to this war is not eliminated by the adoption of this resolution. This Council must continue to work assiduously to bring an end to the war and to ensure accountability for all the atrocities committed during its course. We must also redouble efforts to chart a path towards the swift implementation of the two-state solution. As ever, Guyana is committed to these goals. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Guyana for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Gracias, señor.
Thank you, President. Ecuador once again voted in favor of peace. We supported this draft resolution because we believe that the Council must ensure that its voice is heard in support of a proposal in this sense and that can finally halt the war. This proposal must be accepted by both parties and will put into effect an immediate and total ceasefire. It will allow for the release of the hostages and facilitate the alleviation of the terrible humanitarian situation facing civilians in Gaza. The implementation of all the phases of this proposal will also contemplate the beginning of a reconstruction plan in Gaza and rejects any attempts at demographic or territorial change in the Strip. President, this war began with the terrorist acts of attack of Hamas on the 7th of October. And Ecuador will continue to condemn these attacks, and it continues to cause much pain and suffering. For this reason, my country believes that the proposal on the 31st of May is an opportunity which must be seized to halt the spiral of violence. We must work now to ensure that this is the last war of this long conflict, moving towards a peaceful, negotiated, definitive and just solution for the parties with the existence of two states, Palestine and Israel, upon the basis of the 1967 borders and the relevant resolutions. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Mr. President, Sierra Leone would like to thank the United States for the initiative to work on this resolution. We further acknowledge and support ongoing diplomatic efforts spearheaded by Qatar, Egypt, and the United States aimed at achieving a deal that will bring about tangible results on the ground. It is in anticipation of this result that Sierra Leone voted in favor of the resolution just considered. As we have previously stated in this Council, Sierra Leone shares the view that actions of the Security Council should complement ongoing diplomatic efforts that will bring about a meaningful pact for sustainable peace. While we do not agree to all the elements in the resolution, it is important that as the body responsible for the maintenance of international peace and security, we urge both Israel and Hamas to seize this opportunity to meaningfully engage and commit to an agreement that will lead to a ceasefire, the release of hostages, and exchange of Palestinian prisoners, allow for the effective distribution of humanitarian assistance at scale throughout the Gaza Strip, the reconstruction of Gaza, and actualization of the two-state solution. The recent outcome of Israel's extensive raid in Rafah on 8 June 2024 to release 4 hostages held by Hamas on 7 October 2023 is an indication that until a comprehensive deal is reached by both parties, such operations with devastating consequences for the civilian population will continue. To avoid future catastrophes and put an end to this brutal conflict, Sierra Leone reiterates the need for parties to the conflict to respect and implement all resolutions adopted by this Council, the need for international law to be upheld, and all ICJ orders complied with. It is our sincere hope that parties to the conflict will approach the negotiating table with empathy, flexibility, and careful consideration of the impact of this conflict on the women, children, the elderly, and other vulnerable groups who, since the 7th October 2023, have been victims of their actions. Sierra Leone reiterates its unwavering commitment to this cause until a just and lasting solution is achieved. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of Russian Federation.
President, the Russian Federation abstained on the draft Security Council resolution prepared by American Council colleagues in support of the proposal of mediators on a ceasefire in Gaza. From the very outset of the military escalation in the Palestinian-Israel conflict, we have consistently and unwaveringly advocated for the imperative for a permanent ceasefire regime, including in order to release hostages and remedy the humanitarian situation in the Gaza Strip. We have always welcomed any diplomatic efforts on the ground that are focused on reconciliation within parameters that suit both sides. At the same time, we have a whole host of questions about the American draft resolution, whereby this Council welcomes some deal, the ultimate outlines of which are not known to anyone, perhaps, except the mediators. The information circulating in various open sources are very contradictory. The sponsors of the resolution did not keep the Security Council in the loop of the details of the agreement. We essentially proposed to a cat in a bag. As such, there was no negotiation process. As such, the sponsors brought a variation of a prepared text de facto calling on members of the Security Council against the clock to sign up to it. Hamas is called upon to accept this so-called deal. But still, there is no clarity regarding official agreement from Israel, as is written in the resolution for the deal proposed by President Biden, given the many statements from Israel on the extension of the war until Hamas is completely defeated. So on what specifically has Israel agreed to? Perhaps we'll hear a response to that question today from the Israeli representative. We are convinced that the Security Council should not sign up to agreements with vague parameters and without guarantees not only of their implementation on the ground, but without the slightest clear understanding how the parties themselves, what their attitude is towards it. Essentially, the Council is giving a carte blanche and signing up to this plan with details that they don't have. The 3 parameters and phases, that's not details. From the very beginning of the escalation in Gaza, the Council has adopted 3 resolutions which have remained on paper in terms of implementation. Here we can add a 4th. This is not something we could call a positive trend. The adoption by the Council of a new document with the contents of which raises a mass of questions, even without a clear demand to parties for an immediate and permanent ceasefire, undermines its authority as the main body for maintenance of international peace and security. We did not wish to block the resolution simply because it, as much as we understand, is supported by the Arab world. However, all of the questions that we have remain and require a response. Thank you very much.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my capacity as the representative of the Republic of Korea. The Republic of Korea has repeatedly expressed its strong support for the diplomatic efforts by relevant countries, including the United States, Egypt, and Qatar, to achieve an immediate ceasefire and release of hostages. The recent airstrikes on refugee camps and the massive operation to rescue hostages, resulting in a large number of civilian casualties, once again exemplify the imperative of finalizing the deal as soon as possible. More hesitation means more fatalities. Today, the Republic of Korea voted in favor of the draft resolution proposed by the U.S., with the sincere hope that it can urgently lead to positive impacts on the ground by pressing both parties, notably Hamas, to accept and implement the terms of the deal. It is also of crucial importance that Israel stays true to its word and remains steadfast to the accepted proposal. No other considerations should be prioritized beyond the lives of innocent people, including Israeli hostages and Palestinian civilians in Gaza. The Republic of Korea hopes that today's adoption of the resolution can lead to a concrete outcome on the ground, including a massive expansion of humanitarian aid. The human suffering due to this conflict is simply intolerable. As President Biden mentioned on May 31st, it is time for this war to end. I now resume my function as President of the Council. I now give the floor to the representative of Israel.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, Council, from the very first days following Hamas's invasion and brutal massacre on October 7th, Israel's goals have been very clear: to bring all our hostages back home and to dismantle Hamas's capabilities. Israel is committed to these goals: to free all the hostages, to destroy Hamas's military and governing capabilities, and to ensure that Gaza does not pose a threat to Israel in the future. And as we have echoed numerous times in this very chamber, once these goals are met, the war will end. If Hamas were to release the hostages and turn themselves in, not one more shot needs to be fired. Yet sadly, for the past 8 months, Hamas has refused. 120 hostages are still being held by Hamas in appalling conditions. To this day, Hamas continues firing rockets at Israeli towns and cities and advancing their goal of murdering every Israeli. Members of the Council, it is Hamas that is preventing this war from ending. Hamas and Hamas alone. It is the genocidal jihadists who started this war and who choose to prolong it. pressure must be applied upon Hamas, and blame must be placed where it belongs, on Hamas terrorists. This Council has adopted 3 resolutions calling for the release of hostages, and each time Hamas has utterly ignored your request. Hamas does not care what the Council has to say because they have never been held responsible for their crimes by the Council. The pressure on the terrorists should have begun long ago, but it's still not too late. It must begin now. Colleagues, Hamas's refusal to release the hostages through diplomacy has proven that the effort to bring our hostages home must also include military means. And this Saturday was the perfect example of how this can be achieved. As a result of a heroic operation, the IDF rescued 4 hostages from Gaza. These hostages, Noah Argamani, Almog Meir Jan, Andrei Kuzlov, and Shlomi Ziv, were being held in residential buildings by Palestinian families. While the hostages were guarded by terrorists, Gazan civilians were their jailers. These so-called innocent civilians were not only cooperating with the terrorists, but were complicit in their heinous crimes. As the world witnessed on Saturday, it is Israeli soldiers who sacrificed their lives to bring our hostages back home, while Hamas intentionally sacrifices Gazan children to prevent us from rescuing hostages. Israel regrets any harm to civilians, but it must be emphasized that Palestinians who cooperate with Hamas and take part in their war crimes are not uninvolved. This is the reality we face. The loss of life in Gaza is a tragedy, but if you don't put the blame on Hamas, you're advancing their strategy. Colleagues, Israel stands firm on our principles, and they have not changed. We will continue until all of the hostages are returned and until Hamas military and governing capabilities are dismantled. These have been our goals from day one. Just as President Biden stated on May 31st, Hamas must not stay in power. Israel will not let Hamas rearm or regroup so that Gaza can pose a threat to Israel. This is the unwavering goal that we are determined to achieve. This also means that Israel will not engage in meaningless and endless negotiations which can be exploited by Hamas as a means to stall for time. Mr. President, Hamas is solely responsible for this war. They invaded Israel, massacring innocents and taking hundreds hostages. They continue to hold our loved ones in Gaza and continue targeting Israel. They use Gazans as human shields while furthering their genocidal goals. The time has come for this Council to finally hold Hamas accountable, to finally place the blame where it belongs, to finally condemn terror. As the Security Council, it is your duty to apply relentless pressure on Hamas terrorists and ensure that all the hostages return home. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the representative of Israel for their statement. There are no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. The meeting is adjourned.
stakeout hazard. Marhaba. Hello. I just arrived from the airport to the Security Council. I was in a mission in the Middle East, and I just got back. I was watching the deliberation of the Security Council in the car. As you all know, the Palestinian leadership welcomed this effort, this step in the right direction, and emphasized that, of course, our position has been always to have an immediate ceasefire to stop the killing of our people. So this resolution is a step in that direction. We are grateful for our brothers in Algeria, whom we worked with them very closely to try to influence the draft resolution to be closer to the objectives of the national rights of the Palestinian people. We succeeded to a certain extent, but of course, we did not succeed in all the things that we wanted. But nevertheless, we welcome this step, and I believe that all the Palestinians welcome this step. We want to have a ceasefire. We want to see the implementation of the objective of stopping the fighting completely and to have humanitarian assistance to our people to the level that they need, to stop the forced transfer, to allow our people to return to the areas where they were pushed out of in all parts of the Gaza Strip, including the north, and to see the Israeli forces outside the Gaza Strip and not a single portion of the Gaza Strip geographically to be taken or under the control of the Israeli occupying forces. And of course, we welcome the reference that the occupied Palestinian territory, including the Gaza Strip, is part and parcel of the land of the State of Palestine, in which this occupation has to end from that occupied land so that we can enjoy freedom, independence, and to live in dignity in our state, the State of Palestine, with East Jerusalem. Now, the burden is on the Israeli side to implement this resolution and to have the ceasefire immediately in place, and also to have the exchange, including the release of Palestinian prisoners, and to make this ceasefire a permanent ceasefire. We want also to thank the effort of the mediators, especially our brothers in Egypt and Qatar, and we hope that we can see the beginning of the process of the implementation of this important resolution, which is a step in the right place, as our Palestinian leadership has declared. I am sure that you will be able to receive all the statements that were released in this connection. We, the Palestinian people, are united in seeing the implementation of this resolution. Thank you very much for being with us.
Will be implemented, given the fact that, despite the fact that the Americans are saying that the Israelis accepted this offer, we still, until now, didn't hear any official Israeli statement in that regard. Did you get any assurance that this will be implemented, that the Israelis did actually agree?
Well, the proof is in the details, and we want to see that, that this resolution to be implemented beginning with the ceasefire, and that this ceasefire to be permanent. We do not want to see the continuation of the fighting. We lost a tremendous amount of people, and we want to see the end of this onslaught against our people. And of course, we will continue pursuing justice and accountability through international mechanisms, legal mechanisms, and here I'm referring to the ICJ and to the ICC, and those who committed one additional massacre in Sairat last Saturday should face justice. Those who were responsible for giving the orders, and executing that order should be brought to justice. In fact, I'm sure that you've seen my letter, which was sent to the Security Council based on instructions from my leadership, telling me to ask for an emergency meeting of the Security Council. So part of the discussion that took place today, especially from many of our friends, and specifically from Algeria, reflects our point of view that those who are committing these atrocities and crimes and genocide against the Palestinian people should face the justice that they deserve, and accountability should be in place. We will continue our efforts in the Security Council, as well as in the General Assembly, in the Human Rights Council, to seek justice for our people, to stop these crimes against our people, and to allow for the conditions to be put in place to rebuild Gaza, to reconstruct it, and to open a path for a peaceful option or road that would lead to the end of the occupation and the independence of the State of Palestine with East Jerusalem as its capital. Abdul Hamid.
Thank you, Ambassador Riyad. We just had an argument with Ambassador Robert Wood. We kept telling him that Hamas had accepted this resolution. The Israelis didn't. And in the resolution, it includes that Israel accepted it. So where we stand now, where is the ball now, in which courts, the Israelis or the Palestinians?
I don't know what he said to you. Just I came immediately to this podium, but I can tell you that that there is readiness from the Palestinian side to engage very seriously to see the implementation of this resolution. The number one item in that resolution is to have a ceasefire, to end this fighting, and we are determined with our friends to make it a long-lasting, permanent ceasefire. So the proof is in the pudding. We will see who are the ones who are interested to see this resolution to become a reality, and those who are obstructing it and they want to continue the war of genocide against our people.
But in reality, you can't control what Hamas is going to do. So we hope that Hamas is going to implement it too. So what will be your position if Hamas doesn't respect the ceasefire?
Well, you're dealing with hypothetical issues. I represent all the Palestinian people at the United Nations. I did not hear any Palestinian saying anything other than welcoming this resolution and readiness and willingness to engage in the process of its implementation. So therefore, the basis of your question is not sound. Those who are potentially going to not honor and respect this resolution is the Israeli side. So therefore, let's watch closely whether we will see a beginning of process for serious implementation of this resolution, or we will see one side that will try to find any excuse in order not to meet the commitment that this resolution requires from Israel. And also, I want to bring to your attention the representative of Israel, whom I understand will not be the representative of Israel soon, cursed everyone in the General Assembly, in the Security Council, in all parts of the UN, rebelling against the Charter of the UN, rebelling against Security Council resolutions, rebelling against decisions by the ICJ about provisional measures to take place to stop the killing of the Palestinian people, not to storm Rafah. So judge them by what they say and what they do. Don't try to look for others who are not violating international law and resolutions of the Security Council. At any rate, the few days to come would be important days for all of us to watch. Anybody wants to ask me a question in Arabic? Ambassador,
I wish I speak Arabic.
Okay.
The question is, everybody agrees to, everybody approved this resolution, but what do you think should be the first step, and do you think it should come from Hamas or from Israel? And what do you think about that?
Well, let's see that the parties, as Abdul Hamid said, you know, that the Palestinian side is saying that they welcome the resolution and they are ready and willing to engage in a process with the mediators in order, you know, to see the implementation of this resolution, starting with immediate ceasefire to be put in place. So we will see what the other side, who is not articulating themselves with such clarity yet, we will see how they behave, and based on that, you will make your judgment, and based on that, the Security Council should make sure that its resolution has to be implemented. Thank you very much.